Happy Saturday. It is August 24th, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
And we are two of your airmail editors here to make sense of the world. And it's been yet another crazy week in the news. We will sleep when we're dead. In the U.S., the news cycle is dominated by the Democratic National Convention and its roster of A-list speakers this week, especially, most magnificently, Michelle Obama. Meanwhile, clearly we are all in the wrong business. A new report estimates that 200 million people around the world now describe themselves as content creators. Just for the sake of comparison, the Lancet study estimates that there are only 12.8 million doctors. Troubles ahead. Meanwhile, in much happier and more personal news, it has been a real summer of love here at Airmail. We have some colleagues to congratulate. Deputy editor Nathan King and his wife, Amber Thane, celebrated their wedding. Deputy editor Julia Vitale and her husband, Ludwig Kirk, welcomed baby Leia Louise. And senior editor Elena Clavarino recently became engaged to Ludovico Bonacorsi, our favorite Milanese restaurateur. Congratulations to all. Thank you for bringing the joy into our lives. And on that happy note, Michael, let's get into the issue.
Of course. And we have a wonderful show today. Got some fascinating guests and wonderful conversations. First, as you enjoy the final days of summer, you're no doubt thinking about looking your best this fall. And who better to tell us everything we need to know about beauty and wellness than the always lovely Linda Wells, the editor of Airmail Look. Then, Henry Schlesinger has a wild and little-known story about what was known as the Suicide Fleet. It's an incredible tale of how, during World War I, robber baron families in New York City, such as the Morgans, the Vanderbilts, and the Astors, donated their gilded luxury yachts, replete with Tiffany interiors and Renaissance tapestries and wine racks, to the United States Navy so they could be deployed to hunt down German U-boats in the North Atlantic. It's a story you don't want to miss. And speaking of stories you don't want to miss, Marta Represa has a strange and curious one. She'll reveal how a group of chocolate-making Spanish nuns, a fake bishop, a mixologist, and a former Vatican ambassador with ties to Steve Bannon are trying to, as you might say, make Catholicism great again. You'll have to hear it to believe it. So Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
Okay, Michael, has the Catholic Church become yet another crucible of MAGA? Marta Represa is here to explain. She's a writer and editorial consultant whose work has appeared in The Guardian, Wallpaper, and another magazine. Welcome, Marta.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You have a great story in the issue this week about a low-level schism within the Catholic Church. But before we get into the details of that, let's really talk about Pope Francis, because he's at the center of this story. He's such a renowned and popular figure on the worldwide stage, but how is he perceived by those in the Catholic Church?
It's kind of crazy because Pope Francis is really one of the most hated men in the world right now. And it's not because atheists hate him. It's not because people from other religions hate him. It's really, there's a subsection of the Catholic Church that has a really, really strong dislike for Pope Francis. And it's kind of like, it's a normal thing with a lot of popes. There's always been this idea for a lot of Catholics that the Pope is always like a communist. He's a red. It's always been the same with any Pope, but somehow with Pope Francis, it's gotten even more so.
So what are some of the things he's done that have angered those within the church?
I think just the fact that he's following, of course, the Second Vatican Council ideas. He has always had a more open-minded stance on many issues in the church. He's mentioned poverty as one of the, resolving poverty as one of the cornerstones of his work. He's been a progressive pope compared to Benedict XVI and certainly to John Paul II.
So what is the recourse for those who disagree strongly with what he's doing in his policies? I mean, talk us through exactly what happens when a schism occurs.
Well, before a schism, you can have some people, there are some bishops, there are some people within the church who are very vocally opponents. And these are bishops and archbishops openly disobeying the Pope and openly saying things that go against what the church stands for, what the Vatican stands for right now in time. So there's that. And then there's some subsections of the church that are getting even further away from the Pope by sort of denying that the Pope is legitimate. So that's what we call the sedevacantism. I think that's how you pronounce it in English. And these are people who think that no Pope after Pius XII has been legitimate. So ever since the Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council in 1962 with Pope John the 23rd, all the popes since then have always been illegitimate.
These Catholics, to put it in sort of terms that maybe people here in America might think is who are not Catholic, these are kind of these people who believe that the papal throne has been empty for the last 60 or so years, that they don't recognize any of these popes following that. There's a phrase here in the U.S., not my president. These people might be like, not my pope, in other words, right?
Exactly. That's absolutely it. Yes, they think all the popes since John the 23rd and, of course, Pope Francis are imposters, that they are illegitimate, that the papal throne is empty, and they're just waiting for the Second Vatican Council to be revoked so that the church can get back into the straight and narrow, in a way, I guess.
Well, so maybe that sort of leads us to a big twist in your story this week, which was not my pope / not my president. So can you tell us how these nuns have found themselves at the center of a kind of cultural... They've expressed admiration for this guy, Carlo Maria Vignano, who's a former Vatican ambassador to the U.S., who was excommunicated last month. He, according to your story, is a close ally of the MAGA movement, and Steve Bannon and broadcasts conspiracy theories about the, quote, deep state, and has called Pope Francis a, quote, servant of Satan, while he says Donald Trump is, quote, one of the children of light, unquote. So what's reality here? I mean, how do these nuns find themselves at the center of this battle to kind of, quote, we almost stop the steal of the papal throne?
Yeah, it's a very weird kind of 6 degrees of separation between the Poor Clare nuns in Belorado, which is in Burgos, Spain, and Steve Bannon and Donald Trump, isn't it? Yes, these Poor Clare nuns in Belorado, Spain, surprised the whole of Spain actually in last May, announcing that they were officially separating from the Vatican, from the church, saying that they had found a different way. And so in this very absurd story, very sort of like a little bit of an Almodovar-like story, they announced their separation from the church. And then as the press started to investigate, they discovered that the nuns were living in the convent with two men, somebody who called himself a bishop and somebody who called himself a priest. We found out afterwards that bishop was actually not ordained by anybody within the church structure. So hence why the Spanish press started calling him a fake bishop. As for the priest that works with him, somebody found out that he used to be a mixologist in Bilbao who suddenly decided to become a priest. And these two men described themselves as sedevacantists. And so, yeah, the nuns decided to follow them. And nobody really knows how or why. The nuns themselves have said that somebody that used to go to Mass or that used to know them at the monastery introduced them, but that they had sort of the same ideas. So they merged well and they started working together.
One of the most curious details in your story is these nuns, maybe it seems to me they may have gotten more attention for their break with the church because they also sort of make money by creating mojito chocolates, which are sold in gourmet stores across Spain and Michelin-starred restaurants. Is that the real reason they got so much attention? Because they make this chocolate everyone loves, and that's why they got so much attention for this?
I guess people in Spain knew them beforehand for a good 10 years, I guess, since they started making the chocolate. So these mojito chocolates are really, really well known in Spain. So everybody will be like, oh, make a fancy present to somebody. So you will buy them mojito chocolates from the nuns in Belorado. So it's not just any convent, any monastery that came to the news that way. They were a particularly well-known monastery even before the whole drama began.
It seems like they're not doing quite as well on their own as they were doing when they were a part of the church, no? I mean, now that they've got bank accounts to manage and supply chains to contend with, what's the status of that?
Oh, it's terrible. It's a mess. It's a mess. So, yes, after the schism and after they were excommunicated, which is one further step than the schism, because excommunication is something that the Catholic Church does not take lightly. It's not something they do for anyone. It's very rare, and still 10 of 18 nuns in the monastery got excommunicated, which meant that they were living in the monastery sort of as squatters illegally, because the monastery is supposed to belong to the Poor Clare nuns as an order, so to all the Poor Clare nuns, not just to individual people. So they have refused to vacate the premises so far, so they're still there. The Archbishop is saying that they will have to leave at some point, but of course, I don't think the Vatican has any interest in the optics of evicting nuns from their place of living. And so they have been trying to manage their finances, which has been extremely difficult because the Archbishop then closed some of their accounts, even though he paid some of their very, very big debt. They are deep into that debt. They owe six figures to providers, to employees, etc., etc. Ever since, so they've been having trouble, of course, selling the chocolates now because they cannot ship them. They cannot make a transaction legally. And they did a crowdfunding attempt that didn't really succeed. So it's getting worse and worse by the day for them.
Marta, what do we make of all of this? I mean, is this just another example of the MAGA influence extending far beyond the US into the deepest reaches of all sorts of establishments?
I think to an extent, yes, absolutely, because I think this has been a surprise for Spanish people because it felt like a very fringe thing. Nobody had heard about sedevacantism in any serious way until this happened. And the nuns themselves said about 2-3 weeks ago in a TV show, they went on an interview and they said, you guys, as in you Spanish people, have no idea how big this is in the world. But like sedevacantism is huge in the world. It's just that Spanish people don't know it. And there are huge pockets of sedevacantism in South America, in the United States, and I guess in other countries. So I think it's a thing, for sure, it's a current that is not necessarily big in Spain or in Italy, but is coming from outside.
Well, what a wild and weird story, Marta. Thank you so much for sharing it with us and for discussing all these intricacies, things we never would have known about. The mojito-making nuns and their schism with the Catholic Church. Fascinating stuff.
As you say, it is Almodovar in all its strains. So thanks for sharing it with us. And if you need some new chocolates, I'm sure there's other sources available.
Yes, we'll have to find some new monasteries to follow for the chocolates now.
Thank you so much, Marta.
Thank you so much.
Ashley, I mean, that's sort of like matters of the soul. Let's look at matters of beauty and wellness. And you and Linda can take us into the newest issue of Airmail Look.
Yeah, sometimes when you can escape from all of that, Michael, you just go to airmail.news/look, and we've got plenty to talk about. Linda's the editor of Airmail Look, and she's here to break down the stories you can't afford to miss. Welcome, Linda.
Hello.
So in the new issue of Look, as always, we have a little bit of something for everyone. But one of the biggest conversation starters that we've seen from this issue is a story that Ariel Leaf did on orthorexia. What exactly is this?
So orthorexia is kind of a collision between obsessive compulsion disorder and anorexia nervosa. And it really manifests itself in an obsession with healthy eating that interferes with your normal everyday activities. It's not just you're kind of trying to eat plant-based or you make sure that your food is sourced locally, which has become almost normal in our lives, but it's this inability to sort of function in a group without controlling your every healthy aspect of your eating.
And is this the kind of thing that we're seeing play out a lot online, right? As people are more aware of what others and how others are eating?
I think it is. I think people are sort of humble bragging about how careful they are in the way they eat. And you see things like Ballerina Farm where people are drinking raw milk. And there's a lot of thought and activity in eating well, but this is taken too far. And it's another form of restriction. And restriction, when it goes awry, can result in something more clinically problematic. And that's what orthorexia is.
And how is it treated?
The problem with all eating disorders is they're really, really difficult to treat because there's often a complication and a sort of mixture of a lot of issues that are going on. The desire for control. I don't think it's even about weight. It's more about control, and there are certain depression issues that go along with it. So there are different behavioral modification programs that are used to treat it, but it's challenging. And I think part of the challenge is that it's a manifestation of healthy eating gone awry.
We also have an incredible story in the issue by Brennan Kilbane about Dr. Julius Few, who calls himself a holistic plastic surgeon, and he has one rather well-known fan.
He certainly does. Dr. Few is a plastic surgeon based in Chicago, but also with an office in Santa Monica. And he has a number of very well-known clients, thanks to Gwyneth Paltrow, who is very public about her support of Dr. Few. She doesn't say what she's had done, but she does say that she really believes in him and likes him. And he's spoken at some of her conferences. And he's been called actually by someone at Goop as a holistic plastic surgeon, who really knows what that means, honestly, but he believes in minimally invasive procedures. So his real claim to fame is a kind of thread lift that involves kind of almost like sewing it. And you inject a cannula into the face and it pulls up the drooping areas of the face. And some people love it. And some people believe that it is so minimal that it's actually not even noticeable. But he sees patients particularly in Hollywood and the LA area, at famous people's houses and beautiful, wealthy billionaires' houses, and gives injections to people at these houses, which reminds me of Botox parties from the early aughts. And it's all fascinating, and he's become a beloved character.
I also love, I don't know if it's irony or something altogether different, but this notion that Gwyneth Paltrow has a plastic surgeon that she loves. I mean, her whole sort of goop ethos sort of seems antithetical to all of that surgery, or what am I missing?
I agree. I mean, I do agree. And I think that's why it kind of gets noticed, is that you think of goop as being very healthy and non-invasive and embracing nature and the way all these things work, and clean beauty and all those things, which actually don't really have a definition. So it's all a little bit murky. But then there she is embracing this doctor. Now, I think, who knows? She has been outspoken about having injections and doing certain things that are not all nature and natural. And Dr. Few has a skincare line. So this isn't exactly an admission to plastic surgery, but it is very close to it.
Now, on a similar front, Judith Newman has a very funny and intriguing report on how fabulously wealthy women are rebranding themselves as lifestyle gurus. What's that all about?
I know. I feel like it's a sign of the times. And I think we can look at one of the more famous people, Meghan Markle, who lives rather close to Gwyneth Paltrow, actually, as one of these self-proclaimed gurus. And it sort of becomes an extension of this personal desire for mental health, and then an assumption that you can become an oracle to your friends and invite them over and have sessions and give them affirmations. And it's all kind of touchy-feely and probably very well-meaning, but these people are not experts. And there are a lot of them out there, and it just seems like they take their personal quest and try to make it professional.
So, okay, it's the summer. Some of us have been drinking a lot of rosé. Perhaps it's been margarita season. I don't know. But perhaps it is the time to start thinking about down-regulating our consumption of alcohol. And on that note, there is a promising drug that curbs those cravings. What do we know about this?
Yeah, there's a writer who decided to take this drug. And a lot of the story that she writes is about, I'm not an alcoholic. And you keep reading it and you think, is that really true? I mean, I think that there's so many people who are wondering if they're teetering on that edge of over drinking. And now that the medical research is saying that even one drink a day is not good for your health, I think more and more people are looking at their alcohol consumption, wondering what they should do. So this writer decides to take a new drug called naltrexone, and it curbs the desire for alcohol. It curbs that craving. And she finds that alcohol doesn't give her the pleasure that it used to give her, and it sort of gives her just a bad feeling. It's not like Antabuse, which people would take and actually feel sick when they drank, but it just really kills this urge and the desire and the appeal of alcohol. And she finds that it actually is really effective for her. And so she kind of goes on it when she wants to be careful, and then she goes off it when it's times of celebration. And it's an interesting approach to alcohol consumption. I think we're all trying to find a new way to look at alcohol and be a little bit more responsible with our intake.
Linda, one of my favorite stories in the issue is what we call our big shop, which just has all this incredible merchandise for travel this month. How did you come up with these great products? What can we expect to find? How can you save us?
I feel like travel has become so unpleasant, but I'm one of the few people, I think, who really, when the announcement comes on that says prepare for landing, I'm like, please, no, not yet. I'm not finished. I'm not finished reading. I'm not finished applying masks. So there's a way to make the whole process a lot more comfortable, a lot more luxurious. And it just is a matter of how you pack your carry-on. So we have a list of the best neck pillow where you can actually sit up, and even if you're sitting in economy, not even economy plus, you can sleep very comfortably. Eye masks, and then things that hold the serum on your face. You can actually turn the flight into a spa treatment, which sounds absolutely impossible. But we have products that help with your jet lag and the look of your jet lag and all the after effects of jet lag and things that are relaxing and roll-ons that make you relax and what to wear on the plane so you're really comfortable. And these items actually work off the plane too, so you're not just packing extra stuff for the sake of comfort on the plane. So there are a lot of really great items in there, many, many of which I've used or plan to use.
Linda, is there any other stories you wanted to talk about?
Well, I wrote a story about estrogen creams that are not used for vaginal health, but are actually being applied to the face. And there's this whole movement that was underground, and I didn't know anything about it, but dermatologists and gynecologists have been doing this forever, taking their estrogen cream and applying it under their eyes, on their hands, to their face. So a company called Alloy has a more pleasing version of these estrogen creams that are mixed with lots of skincare ingredients, but are available by prescription. You can get them online and you apply them to your face, and they can really help increase the collagen that you lose once you reach about 35. So when you go through menopause, you lose about 30% of your collagen. And so this can really restore that. So these creams are really interesting and they're booming. Lots of different companies are providing them, but they are available only by prescription. So many people, when they hear the word estrogen, think breast cancer risk, but there are a lot of really, really good studies of topical estrogens that prove that the cream is not absorbed systemically. So there's no increased risk of breast cancer. It's always good to check with your doctor, but the doctors really do say this is a great way to increase collagen in your skin. And that's always been a real pain point for people. Everyone's always been chasing after collagen and elastin because that's what makes skin look younger and plumper and fresher. And most creams don't increase collagen, so this is a real breakthrough.
It sounds exciting. I want to get one of these prescriptions, Linda. Do we have to go to like a gynecologist to get them, or can you get them sort of through the platform that's selling the creams?
You can get them through the platform, and it's really easy. You have to fill out a questionnaire, and then you have a chat with one of the doctors, and then you get the prescription and it's sent to you, and you get the cream itself. You don't have to go fill it at CVS, so that's also a plus. And it's just myalloy.com. It's really easy.
Okay, we have our homework. Not you, Michael, sorry, but Linda and I have our homework.
And they say it's really important for anybody over 35.
Good to know. Well, Linda, thank you so much. It's such a great issue. You can get it at airmail.news/look. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you so much, Ashley and Michael.
Well, Henry Schlesinger has a great story about one of summer's great pastimes, which is sailing and yachting and boating. And he's here to tell us all about how the New York Yacht Club helped to fight the Germans in World War I.
Henry is a journalist and author who has written about espionage history for over 20 years, and his most recent book is Honey Trap: Sex, Betrayal, and Weaponized Love. I'm definitely reading that. Welcome, Henry.
Hi.
Okay, Henry, so it's February 1917. America is about to enter World War I, and a young Franklin Roosevelt, who at that point is Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy, a Navy that really has no battleships at this point, shows up at the New York Yacht Club kind of hat in hand to pitch some of the wealthiest families in the world, people like the Morgans, the Vanderbilts, the Astors, on a crazy idea, which is give us your mega yachts, which are filled with Tiffany glass and humidors and all this luxury stuff. And so we can use them to fight the German U-boats in the North Atlantic. How did the Navy find itself in this position?
We really didn't have much of a Navy leading up to that. There wasn't much of a war. There weren't very many wars being fought. We thought, as we always do, that we were protected by two oceans from conflict.
Were these vessels ready for the challenges of battle? And were they seaworthy for this particular purpose? Or were these more sort of pleasure boats that required a bit of attention?
They were absolute pleasure boats, and they tore out all of the furnishings. These enormous dining rooms were turned into barracks. All of the Tiffany fixturing was taken out. There's no end to what they did. They drilled through these beautiful pine decks to emplace guns, really heavy artillery guns, depth charge launchers. The ships were completely redone, took out or boarded up enormous plate glass windows, installed an enormous amount of armaments on them, fore and aft. One of them had this enormous player piano type organ on it that at the time cost tens of thousands of dollars that had to be ripped out of the yacht. Persian rugs had to be taken out, silverware, plates, glass, all of that kind of thing. What they did have is they were very fast. and they were very maneuverable. They had the latest technology, seagoing technology, which a lot of the Navy ships didn't have.
Tell us about the Morgan's boat, the Corsair 3.
Enormous. It was an enormous pleasure boat. It had its own humidor for his cigars. He built it as the biggest yacht in the world. There was nothing like it. If you go onto the websites today and Google super yachts, this one would certainly compete. Imported wood, stained glass, enormous power plant generating for electricity, which was something of a rarity at the time.
And how much did they lease this to the government for?
Most of them gave it to the government for nothing. Some of them for $1 a year or $1 a day. A few were sought to make profits from it, but not very many. Most of them were given over free of charge.
Yeah, take us through the life of the Corsair.
Built in the 1890s during the Gilded Age. Morgan used it. It was the third yacht. The third yacht he owned, called the Corsair. Saw action in Europe, rescuing seamen whose boats had been downed by or shot by torpedoes. Suffered minimal damage, even served in World War II, and then it was given over to the government as a geological survey ship. Oceanography ship.
And when the United States entered World War I in April of 1917, how was the Corsair used?
It was used as an escort, I believe, a sub-hunter and escort. So they had guys, it was very Moby Dick. They didn't have sonar at the time. They had guys in crow's nests with binoculars and telescopes looking for submarines. It worked as an escort ship, which meant there would be troop carriers that it would travel alongside of. And it was heavily armed with these giant guns.
And were these boats in the Corsair included? Were they crewed exclusively by members of the military, or were there civilians on board as well?
Interesting you should ask that. Many of them were crewed by the owners or relatives of the owners, as well as military personnel. The military personnel was drawn from all walks of life. And they came out of Princeton, they came out of Harvard, they came out of Wall Street, but they also came out of clerk jobs and truck driver jobs, or today would be called blue-collar job. But Vincent Astor, served on his own boat, the Noma, and Junius Morgan served on his grandfather's boat, the Corsair. And many of the members of the yacht club served as junior officers. So they put themselves in harm's way as well as their boats.
It's quite extraordinary when you think of that context. It's a little bit as Teddy Roosevelt did when he formed his Rough Riders, his unit, which was drawn also of friends of his who'd graduated from the Ivy League. And then to sort of see these guys not just giving their pleasure craft to the Navy, but also then signing up to serve on them as well.
These guys weren't angels.
This is still the height of the Gilded Age, really.
Well, it's the tail end, sort of. These guys weren't angels and were robber barons and early in life. I don't discount patriotism. I think there was a strong vein of patriotism that went through these guys, old-fashioned patriotism.
In some ways, it would be, maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but the only thing that comes to mind is like we're sitting here now and we're told that we might not have a big enough Navy to compete with the Chinese or other threats. And it would be like saying, Jeff Bezos, hey, Lorene Powell Jobs, hey, those really nice boats you have, we might need them. It's the only sort of comparison I can make. And yet it would be about asking people to give very tech-advanced craft and make it available to the Navy.
Right. We would say, hey, we might need them. And by the way, you won't receive any credit or money, or you can't talk about it. And how many of these people would go for that?
It's kind of a beautiful example of old world patriotism.
Yeah, if you want to be mean about it, you could call it jingoism, but I think it's old-fashioned patriotism and self-interest, and patriotism and self-interest aren't mutually exclusive.
When Franklin Roosevelt showed up, they all responded to his request.
Well, he was one of them. He was a member of the yacht club. He knew that world. It wasn't a career military person showing up asking. It was one of them and making this play, like you said, hand in hand. And they responded admirably.
What I love about this story, too, is it reminds us of what a sort of bootstrap affair some elements of the U.S. government were just a little more than 100 years ago. I mean, it seems unfathomable today that we'd be in this position with the government asking civilians for help with the military, given how developed we've become over the past century.
It was pretty ad hoc. They'd never been a world war. They didn't even number this one, right? Until the second.
Yeah, and as you also note in your story, I mean, this threat from the Germans and the submarines, even before our entry into the war, was the Germans had brought it right to our border. They'd, as you remind us, they had blown up munitions in New Jersey.
Damaged the Statue of Liberty.
Explosion was so bad it had damaged the Statue of Liberty. They had sailed a U-boat right up into the harbor of Newport and invited U.S. Navy on it to just take a look at it. And then they promptly went out into the Atlantic and sank ships again, right?
They really didn't want America entering the war. But there was also, and we overlook this, a real offensive. They were blowing up not only Black Tom Island in New Jersey, but they were blowing up other munitions plants. They were sabotaging them. They were paying people to sabotage the material going overseas. They were sinking cargo ships, a lot of them. It was a perilous time.
Henry, also in your story, you note that this effort sort of within the club and sort of became known as, quote, the Suicide Fleet. Was that a name that they all sort of gave themselves knowingly at the time, or did that sort of name land on them later?
I believe that name landed on them from career Navy officers. There were elements in the Navy that really disapproved of the effort and still disapprove of the effort. They thought that we should have been better prepared, which they have a point there. But as I noted in the story, there was one ship, the Margaret, which was in very bad shape when it entered service. And they used that as an example. It's an unfair example. 2 of the crew members of the Suicide Fleet were recipients of the Medal of Honor. They acted heroically. Most of the ships performed really well under circumstances, very difficult circumstances. And again, the first ship sunk, the first American warship sunk in World War I was part of the Suicide Fleet.
Well, it's a fascinating story, Henry, so thank you so much for it.
Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report, our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it, is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
I know you've got something you can recommend to fill the long and lonely hours of the weekend.
I do. You all know we lost one of the great heroes and leading men of film this past week, Alain Delon, who died at 88. And I thought we should all watch a movie. And I think it's the heat of August. It's the end of summer. And there's so many great films, of course, that he's done, from The Samurai to The Leopard to Purple Noon, Rocco and His Brothers. But one I thought would be a great way to sort of get the best of Delon in many ways and a great end of summer is La Piscine, which is directed by Jacques Deray, who is one of the star's sort of favorite directors. If you've never seen it, you are in for a treat. In it, you've got Delon and his former real-life girlfriend, Romy Schneider, who play this couple in a sort of just spending their days around a Provence pool on this sun-soaked vacation. And then, of course, it's complicated by the arrival of Maurice Ronet, who, just to remind you, he faced off against in Purple Noon about a decade prior. And Ronet shows up with who else but his 18-year-old daughter, played by Jane Birkin. Now, someone once said, you've got in this film 4 people who are the most perhaps beautifully photographed actors ever. And it's a sort of world where 3's a crowd, but 4's a French erotic thriller. And this one is a great way, as I said, to wind down summer, and a great way, if you've never seen Delon's work, get an introduction to that. And if you do love his work, why not see it again? It's called La Piscine. It's streaming on Max as well as the Criterion Channel. And you, my dear?
Well, we had a book review in Airmail last week. I have been influenced by our book review section yet again, and I'm reading Christopher Isherwood, Inside Out by Catherine Bucknell, which Pico I reviewed for us last week. Have you read his work, Michael?
Of course. We love Isherwood.
We love Isherwood.
Best known for writing the material that became Cabaret.
And A Single Man.
Yeah.
There's an exhaustive new biography of him from Catherine Bucknell, who is one of his longtime chroniclers. And she not only places him in this context of Hollywood history, but it is a name dropper's paradise. I mean, you've got cameos in this from everyone from Greta Garbo to Charlie Chaplin to David Bowie. It's a delightful romp through Hollywood history from the 30s to the 80s. But Isherwood, as you know, was born in the UK, and so he was really informed by that boarding school Oxford perspective, and in many ways was rebelling against that throughout his literary career. Just an exceptionally interesting gentleman and a great subject for a great new book.
Sounds terrific.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We wish you a wonderful weekend. Mike, will you please read us out?
Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officers, Bill Keenan, and our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. Our theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music, but most of all, thank you again for joining us.